So, how did I get involved in the space theatre? I was never a very good school student. My interests were drama and politics, and most of my weekends was spent at the Von Bryceland School of Drama from 1972 onwards, and I can't remember how I actually got to hear of it, but that's what it was. That's what it was for me. My every Saturday off to the Space Theatre, and that's how I got caught up in the whole kind of whirlpool of it, and it was that kind of atmosphere. You kind of got sucked into it, and before long, 1972 became 1973, and then I decided that after school, that's where I wanted to be. And also at the time, in those years, going to university, you had to sign that little document that said you will not be involved in any subversive action, being of another you. And I went to Brian Asprey and said, could I come and work at the Space Theatre once I finish? And he said, yes. And of course, the very next day I reported for duty, and there I was. And I started off as a stage manager. I think my very first job was a production called Superman, and it was operating the sound equipment, and it was quite a funny situation, because it was just literally putting on it was a huge reel-to-reel machine, and having to know exactly when to switch on and when to switch off. And it was, in those days, it was still the splice machines, and boy, oh boy, it was, sort of putting it on at exactly the right time and putting it off at exactly the right time, and having to reel it back and reel it on without making the squeaky sound. And well, we managed. And then, of course, I have a wonderful memory of Marilyn van Rienen being ill one night, and she was one of the actors in the production, and there was a song that she had to sing, and she couldn't do it because she had, I think, a very bad bout of bronchitis, and Peter Dirk Ace had, of course, taken over her role that night, and he was dressed up as a woman. And I know there was an incident with socks and things being stuffed in all the strategic places, and eventually things started creeping out all over the show. But my part in that was that I had to take over Marilyn's singing role, and the song had to be sung from a particular place, so I had to creep around the stage. So with the sound equipment going and me having to creep around to this particular place to sing the song, and then having to get back in time to switch off the machine. But yeah, that was all part of working at the Space Theatre. I have some very wonderful memories, and another great memory of mine as well was Yvonne Bryceland in Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. I will never forget this as long as I live. The lighting box was famous for not working when it rained. There was always a leak, and it always got wet, and it used to have to be covered with plastic, and somehow or the other it always dripped, and the lighting box never worked once it got dripped upon. And this particular evening it was raining quite heavily, and the lighting box just cut out in the middle of performance, and it was at quite a poignant moment. And the production stopped, and we asked the audience to just sit tight, and the stage manager and we lit, I think, about 60 candles around the stage. And Yvonne, unfortunately without her glasses, was as blind as a bat, but she got quite used to, or she knew exactly where she had to go. And I don't think there was much movement for her at that point, but it was a very, very beautiful moment. And there she was in candlelight, and it was, I know the gentleman caller was there, and Hilary Gasson, it was herself and Hilary Gasson, Wilson Dunster, Billy Flynn. And it was at that moment where she said, she was talking about the silver slipper of a moon, and suddenly the lights went on. But these were things that happened, and it was just, they were glorious moments, and I was so lucky to be involved in that, and these were all moments that just set me on the path, and I'm talking about what, 36 years ago. Gee, wasn't that long ago, but and then when I think back of the times, I sold tickets at the box office, I cleaned the dressing rooms, one of the other things that I remember was there was a wonderful woman called Jean Naidu as well, who was also played a large part. She was another mentor in my life, apart from that wonderful man called Brian Asprey. She made us aware of the special branch, who were, sort of quite they were regular visitors to the theatre. And we used to have this little game, as it were, to see who could sniff them out. And when it was my turn to sell tickets at the box office that night, we used to sort of have a look to see, and the thing was, funny raincoats, strange haircuts, people who were slightly more nervous looking than the rest of the audience, because most people who came to the Space Theatre were a little bit more bohemian, a little bit more hippie looking, and just slightly more funky than the ordinary South African. So you knew who they were, and so the game was just to try and sniff them out, and they were there and they were watching, and so you were aware of the fact that they were there. So we used to be able to report back and say, well, there were either one or two of them in the audience. So it was a case of well, let's see how the production went, and if we knew there were no phone calls to say, well, the production was possibly going to be closed down or whatever, then that it was we were safe, and that it would be carrying on, and our salaries were safe for the rest of the month or the week or however long the production was going to be carrying on.
What was your salary?
Oh, right. I started off at 8 Rand a week, and I think after sort of about 6 months or so, it was increased to 10 Rand a week, and then my final salary at the Space Theatre, and that was after I started in 1974, and I think I finally left, and that was after the big move down to the YMCA, or was it the YMCA, the YWCA? That was, I think it ended at 25 Rand a week or something. But hey, in those days, a Rand was a Rand, and you could do a lot with it. Those were great days, and lots of wonderful times and wonderful experiences.
Okay, you said you were very political. So it was one of your two things, drama and politics. Tell me about the politics.
Well, I remember in 1972, in fact, was one of the first riot happened in 1972 with the University of Cape Town students at St. George's Cathedral, in fact, and that was the first protest against Afrikaans in the schools. And I was still a school student, and we decided to go down to St. George's Cathedral and stand and be a part of it all. And I think I met up with people like Paul Hertzberg and my brother Vincent. They were at at St. George's Cathedral in that day, and it was actually, I think, one of the first times that the police actually went into the cathedral, because we were running all over the place, and they actually jumped over the altar and chased us up into the top section of the cathedral, and some of the students were quite badly beaten that day. That was the one thing, and then towards the 1976, which was the really bad part of the unrest. I remember working on top of the Space Theatre painting flats one day, and I heard shots being fired in St. George's Street and Adley Street, and I remember feeling a sense of I need to get down there, I need to be part of what is going on. And because then being young and being aware and being being so engrossed in what was actually happening, and being so angry as well. One had a sense of just wanting to be a part of the change, and I think it was, you had there were mixed feelings of the show must go on no matter what, because that was something which was so instilled in us, and yet wanting to be part of what was going on. And I had a huge struggle with myself, and unfortunately the political side of me won. And I remember running down the stairs and going down into Adley Street and picking up a banner and starting to chant with the rest of the crowds, and being sort of swept up with the masses. And the one thing that I remember very clearly was, suddenly out of nowhere, Paul Hertzberg and Marilyn van Reenen actually pulling me aside as a policeman was about to hit me with a baton, and the two of them grabbing me and saying, what are you doing, and me pulling them away and saying, leave me alone, this is what I have to do. I feel this strong urge to be part of what is happening, and I suppose being young and being I'm not quite sure what the word is, but just being having that incredible urge to be. So it was really just a question of wanting to be involved in the protest and the demonstration, and so I found myself in the midst of it all. But just coming back to the theatre, a lot of people said that the space was sort of doing all this political theatre, but it wasn't really true. We were just doing theatre. There was this wonderful opportunity, first of all, for people. It didn't matter what color you were. It was just a wonderful opportunity for people to get together and make theatre. I mean, we spoke earlier about Superman, for instance, and there was Billy Curry playing the lead in a mask, and you know, just because he was the best actor to be performing it at the or to be playing the lead at the time. And then I remember myself and Vincent and Billy Curry again playing 3 stage managers in a production, a late night production called Musica. And it just so happened that it was a late night production because of the whole club situation. But I mean, I remember also being involved in lots of other things because we were very busy. I mean, there were times when people were performing a 10 o'clock show, and then you were, you know, in between you were either rehearsing or preparing for a lunchtime show, and then you would be either rehearsing or preparing for the main show, and then there was a 10 o'clock show as well. So, you know, we were, and it was just a wonderful experience. And when the whole sort of when the government eyes were really sort of focused on the space theatre and the club situation became a reality, and we were suddenly aware of the fact that, oh, well, now we have to do something about it because, you know, we were being focused upon by the big sort of boogie men in their bureaucratic seats and whatever. We got around it. We got around it by creating the club situation, as it were, and but it became, I suppose, it did become a bit of a cocoon. Mm-hmm. It did become a bit of a. We did create a situation where it was, I think, almost safe for us in a sense, and we did separate ourselves from reality out there. But it was an interesting time. It was an expressive time. It was an exhilarating time. It was because we dared to do things that other people were a little bit scared of. And I remember a late night production called Futs. I mean, for goodness sake, I played a pig in a sty and had to make squealing noises. I'm not going to tell you why I had to make the squealing noises. Yeah. But I made squealing noises at appropriate times. But, you know, I'm grateful that I was part of that. I'm grateful that I was part of that time. I'm grateful that I was part of a theatre which was so exciting, a theatre which I think set a lot of people on the road, which set them on the path to major careers. People who have come and gone, have passed on. People who've made huge names, not just, you know, in South Africa, but everywhere else in the world. People who have, I think, whose minds have opened up, who came with very set ideas and and who've had their minds opened up to all kinds of things. Political theatre, yes. Was it a place for politics? In a sense, yes, but I think it was more just, it was a theatre. It was a place where theatre was alive. And that's what I enjoyed about it most.
Which were your favourite personal productions that you were in? More memorable ones?
Well, there was I think the plays that I enjoyed most, I must be honest with you, a lot. There weren't many productions that I was in because, it was much more of a training ground for me. But I did a lot of stage management, and I was also, very involved in behind the scenes. But Rape the Review, an Athol Fugard production, that for me was quite an exciting production with Karen Willoughby, Claire Stopford, and Toko Nsinga, myself. I have some fond memories of Karen Willoughby and myself arriving rather early for a production, and it was a very cold, wet day, and we decided to stop off at the Metropole Hotel. I'm ashamed to say, and she had one sherry too many. And it was a very interesting production. I don't think Lynn Marie, who was the director, was very impressed with us that day, but nonetheless we got through it. And I think 'tis pity she's a hall, though I wasn't in it, but with Hilary Gasson and Blaise Koch was certainly one of my favorites. And then I think the one other production that I stage managed that really, apart from the Glass Menagerie, which was my all-time favorite, was Outcry, Tennessee Williams's Outcry, with Michie Maxwell and Bill Flynn, was also for me, one of my all-time favorites. And there were so many, and far too many to remember.
So you played a pig, but you also played a baby.
And I also played a baby. That's right. Gee, so many
rats.
So many in Rats. That's right. Gee whiz, I that one slipped my memory. So, The Sad Tale of Charles Common. I remember it was during the times of trouble, during the very heavy political years. It was during the time that a lot of conspiracy theories and sort of rumors of recruitment for the special branch and informants and things like that were happening, especially amongst the UCT students and amongst the cultural crowd was happening. And Zwandile and myself were walking past a restaurant one day, or we were in a restaurant, and we happened to see Charles Common having lunch with a man by the name of Craig Williamson. And Craig Williamson is a renowned informant for the Nationalists, was a renowned spy for the Nationalist government then, or the special branch at the time. And it was no secret that he was on a recruitment drive amongst those of us who were in the theatre and also amongst the UCT students. And being aware of this, and also being, I suppose, being shocked by the idea that somebody in the circle, had dealings with this man. We went back to the theatre and then decided to, after much discussion about this, decided to let people know that what we had seen. And, well, as you can imagine, this spread like wildfire, and after much discussion, Dimitri Nicholas van Arakis called a meeting, and Charles Common was confronted. I was obviously pivotal to this discussion, having been one of two people who had seen him, and I felt really bad about this because I was very fond of Charles, but I'd seen what I'd seen, and Charles had, he denied having been recruited by Craig Williamson. It turned out that he and Craig had been at school together. To this day, I mean, we'll never know, what the truth of the matter is. But it did cause quite an uproar. It did cause quite a split. I think my memory of it, that for a long time there was distrust, and I think it was the start of a crack in the family, so to speak, that never really healed. I know that many years later, Charles and I did talk about it, and it wasn't a question of apologizing, because I saw what I saw, and he did have lunch with this person. It was during a time which was highly. It was a volatile time. It was a time of as I said earlier, conspiracies, and it was a fearful time for everybody, it was a scary time, but we did talk about it many years later, and we ended up saying, well, that was then and this is now, and we didn't end up bad friends or anything like that, and yeah, so that's the story about that time and that incident.
Okay.
I always wanted to be an actress. I mean, there was no two ways about it. I always, that was the one thing that I'd set my mind on from the time that I could remember, and it had to do with the fact that my father was involved in theatre from the time I could remember. He was involved in a company, I think, called the Peninsula Players, and he had his own plays. I remember they were doing Shakespeare as well as Genet's The Blacks, and I remember my grandmother had this barn at the back of her house, and going to play in there and opening up these huge boxes. I didn't know then that they were called skips, and the smell of grease paint and musty old costumes and things, and dressing up, and all by myself, and pretending, and I think that's what. And traveling with my father to PE, because that's how they used to travel with their plays. They used to take plays from Cape Town to PE, and watching rehearsals and that kind of thing. And that's what got me into this idea of wanting to act. And at high school, I was very involved in theatre, and I remember myself and Thomas Davids and Alan Liebenberg. We wrote a play. Gee whiz, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the thing, but we it was about. It had a slight political slant in that. We knew that the white kids didn't have to pay for their school books, and the coloured kids had to pay a certain amount for their school books, and the black kids, they had to pay for their school books, and the whole thing was written about the issue of the haves and the have-nots, and we performed this for the school, and then it was taken to the South African Black Students Association. They had their annual general meeting, I think it was, and we performed it for them there, and then they sort of said, yeah, we must join the South African Black Students Association, and they tried to recruit us, and it was quite a thing. We were very proud of ourselves at the time, and that I think was also our sort of introduction to student politics as such. And slowly but surely, we got involved in the SASO and SAXA and that and that's when it all. We're talking about the early 70s, and that's when it was all sort of happening, and going to all the little protest meetings and learning about sort of I can remember. Having a poetry reading in the World Council of Churches hall in Mowbray, while they were busy recruiting for a ZAPU in the loft, of this particular building on the same night, and Livingston High was incredibly well. It was kind of twofold, because they believed in education first and liberation afterwards, which was very much kind of against what was happening at the time. There was this whole liberation first, education afterwards. But I remember my teachers being very, G.L. Abrams, being very specific in saying to us, you have to be educated before you are liberated, and looking back now, he was right. And when I look at the state of the country and the mess that we're in, I keep hearing his voice at the back of my mind going, education first and liberation after.